What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about 6 mistakes that you guys should let your idiot league members make, and then in turn 6 mistakes that you guys should avoid making in your fantasy football drafts. If you guys enjoyed the video, do me a huge favor, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. I think if you can avoid these 6 mistakes, you will drastically increase the chances of winning your fantasy football league. And let's just dive right into it, starting off with mistake number 1. You guys need to avoid drafting low upside teams. In a 12-team league, assuming everyone has an equal shot of winning that league, you've got a 1 in 12 shot, 8.33%. There can only be one winner in your league, and then, maybe second place, you're getting paid out, maybe getting your money back. But in most leagues, only 2 spots are actually getting paid out. But I think a lot of people out there seem to be playing for 6th, 7th place. They just kind of want to stay in the middle of the pack, and that is just not a league-winning strategy. You don't win anything for being slightly above average. So in my opinion, you should be making the decisions that raise the ceiling of your fantasy football team, and you can do that in a few different ways. The first way that I think you can do that revolves around correlating your draft picks and then specifically looking at player stacks. So if you guys aren't familiar, stacks are pretty much just getting players that are correlated together. Typically that would be, a quarterback and their wide receiver, a quarterback and their tight end. It can even be, wide receiver, running back, quarterback, running back, just, betting on an offense as a whole. And I think you could definitely make the argument that stacks are more important when you're looking at like larger tournaments, larger best ball formats, but I still think they can be very important in your typical 12-team leagues. And I'm not saying you should go out there reach huge on pairing a quarterback with your early round wide receiver, or reach huge to try to get a wide receiver for your early round quarterback. But I do think that you should definitely not be avoiding stacking players from a similar offense. And the argument here is pretty simple, right? Say you're drafting an early round quarterback. You are making the bet that that quarterback is going to have a big season. That's obviously why you're drafting them. And if that quarterback is going out having a big season, it is very likely that at least one of their weapons is also balling out, right? Like, it's tough for a quarterback to have a monster season and then none of the weapons are actually paying off for them. So say you're drafting a guy like Josh Allen. If you're expecting Josh Allen to have a boom year, you should probably be trying to pair him with a guy like Dalton Kincaid, maybe a Keon Coleman, a Curtis Samuel, a Khalil Shakir, someone like that. And a great example of this that we saw last year was between CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott. So CeeDee Lamb was going as like a late first round pick. Dak Prescott was more of like that fringe QB1 area. And if you drafted CeeDee Lamb, you had a 19.3% win rate. So drafting CeeDee Lamb more than doubled your chances of winning your fantasy football league. If you drafted Dak, he was also someone that helped you win your leagues. The win rate was up at 13.8%. 1 in 12 would be 8.33. So both guys were very solid picks last year. But if you drafted both of them on the same team, you stack those 2 players together, your win rate skyrocketed all the way up to 28.4%. You more than tripled the chances of winning your fantasy football league by stacking those 2 players together. So stacking is the first way I think you can increase the upside of your fantasy teams. The second one is going to be hitting on your late round picks. And I think there are objectively good and bad ways to fill out your bench. Since 2017, there have been 16 total running backs and wide receivers who have delivered a win rate of 16.7% or higher. So they at least doubled the chances of winning your fantasy football leagues. When we're looking at these 16 league-winning running backs and wide receivers, the vast majority of these players were either rookies or second-year guys. So you should be going out there throwing darts on rookie wide receivers, young running backs in ambiguous situations. I would much rather target those younger options, the unproven players, than drafting these veterans who have proven year after year they are not fantasy relevant. Like, give me that mystery box of the young rookie, the second-year running back in a unproven backfield. Those are the types of players you should be targeting. And if you're playing in more casual platforms where you're one of the more locked-in members of your league, you're going to have the opportunity to churn the waiver wire throughout the entire season. You're going to have a better idea of what players you should target. So there's really very little risk in throwing late-round upside shots at some of these young players. If they don't hit, fine. You just hit the waiver wire. You can replace them. But as you can see on the screen, these are the league winners that were drafted in round 10 or later. You have so many rookies. I think you have 8 rookies here. 3-year 2 guys, 1-year 3 player. A lot of these running backs, Kamara was a rookie, James Robinson was a rookie, a day 3 pick, Phillip Lindsay rookie, Kareem Hunt was a rookie. You had Devon Achane last year. Some of these rookie wide receivers, Puka Nacua, Justin Jefferson, Terry McLaurin. There are still, some veteran options here. Raheem Mostert last year, J.D. McKissick and Mike Davis in 2020, Devonta Parker in 2019, but it's just a much worse bet to be trying to hit on these veterans who haven't done much. You should just be throwing these shots at these young players who can break out and have some upside in year 1 or year 2. Now, shifting into the final way I think you can increase the upside of your teams, it has to deal with handcuff running backs. And if you're not familiar with the term handcuff running back, it's pretty much the clear running back 2 behind the clear running back 1. So I mentioned Mike Davis, right, with that last graphic. In 2020, Christian McCaffrey was the Panthers' clear-cut running back 1. You had Mike Davis was the handcuff. He was the clear-cut running back 2. And the upside for handcuffs is pretty clear. If the starting running back goes down, they step right in and become fantasy relevant pretty much right away, and the running back position works very differently than wide receiver. Running back touches are much less earned than wide receiver, and what I mean by that is that if you have a guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown, say he gets injured, Jameson Williams does not automatically step up to be a wide receiver 1 for fantasy, right? You have to earn those targets. You have to be a great player to be a very good fantasy wide receiver. At the running back position, if Kyren Williams were to go down, regardless of how great Blake Corum is, right, say he struggles a little bit, they're literally called handoffs for a reason. You are just handing the running back the ball. So you can rack up volume, you can rack up fantasy points. You don't need to be an elite option to score a lot of fantasy points at the running back position. So if Kyren were to go down, Blake Corum could just step right in and be a weekly top 10 running back. You just are not getting that same type of upside at the wide receiver position, which is why I'd much rather roster these handcuff running backs than like some random wide receiver 5 who has no upside, who's never going to crack your lineup. A handcuff's never going to crack your lineup without an injury, but if that injury does happen, they can be very key pieces in your fantasy football lineup. And there seems to be a debate pretty much every single year talking about whether or not you should draft your own handcuff running back. And I understand why people do want to draft their own handcuff. You have some security. If your starter goes down, you have someone to plug and play. But I think that's kind of like the definition of playing for 6th or 7th place. Drafting your own handcuff is not the pick that's going to elevate you to win your league, make the playoffs, get to the championship. So I am pretty firmly in the camp of not drafting your own handcuff. And this is the way I look at it. If you draft your own handcuff, there are 2 things that can happen. The first one is that your stud running back, your early round pick, they stay healthy, they play well, they play poorly, whatever, but that handcuff running back is completely useless. If the starter stays healthy, that dude's just rotting on your bench. The other outcome would be that the stud running back gets hurt, your handcuff is actually playing, but you're probably getting less production than you would if that, stud running back stayed healthy. So either way, one of those picks is pretty much useless. On the other hand, if you draft a handcuff from a different team, you have the upside of that stud running back staying healthy, your handcuffs starting running back, going down, getting injured. Now you have your running back 1, your running back 2, whoever it is, but you also have this handcuff that you can now plug and play into your lineup. I think that's how you kind of gain that advantage on your league mates with handcuffs. And let's actually take a look at some recent examples. I'd say the 2 most valuable handcuffs last year were Zach Moss and Jerome Ford. And you can see here, if you drafted Jonathan Taylor last year, you didn't have a great win rate, 6.5%. He actually hurt your chances of winning your fantasy league if you did draft him. If you drafted Zach Moss, he had a very solid win rate of 12.6%. But if you drafted both Jonathan Taylor and Zach Moss, you actually had a lower win rate than if you just drafted Jonathan Taylor and didn't have his handcuff. So the win rate, if you stacked them together, was 6.4%. So actually drafting both of these dudes, even though the handcuff became valuable, it was actually worse than, not even drafting Zach Moss at all. And then another example, Jerome Ford. If you drafted Nick Chubb, you had a 3.6% chance of winning your league. If you drafted Jerome Ford, around league average, 8.4%. If you stacked them together, drafted both of them, only a 2.1% of winning your fantasy football league. So it's not giving you upside. It's really not even giving you that security. So I would strongly advise you guys to draft a different handcuff. Do not handcuff your own running back. Now, shifting into the second mistake you guys should be avoiding is going into your draft with one specific set plan. I think it's very important to have a general idea of the platform you're playing on, I'm going to touch on that a little bit later. But I think a lot of people, sometimes I see it in my comments, you can just tell these people go into their drafts completely locked in on one strategy. It could be locked in on like, I'm taking this player in round 1, then I'm going to take this player in round 2. It could also be that like they know they want to start with a hero RB draft strategy or double hero RB, zero RB. But in your fantasy drafts, being fluid in your approach is very, very important. You should never trap yourself onto one specific player, one specific strategy, because if you do that, you're going to end up passing up on value that unexpectedly falls to you, or you're going to end up having to reach on someone, or a position to kind of fulfill that strategy you want to execute. I think it's important to understand the different draft strategies, whether that's hero RB, double hero RB, zero RB, but you shouldn't know what strategy you're actually executing until you're a few rounds into the draft. Like, I'm aware of all those draft strategies, but I'm going best player available through the first few rounds, and then if I happen to have one stud running back and then I didn't draft another one, all right, I'm running with a hero RB build. But I don't go into drafts saying this is the exact strategy I'm going to execute, because I think you're just going to end up missing out on value elsewhere, and you're going to end up having to reach for certain players when you probably shouldn't. So that was mistake number 2. Mistake number 3 is going to be poor roster construction. And this is definitely where understanding the different draft strategies kind of comes into play here, because in the early rounds, you should almost always be drafting the best player available. But at some point, you're going to need to shift to optimally filling out the rest of your roster. The way you spend your early round picks should definitely have an impact on where you draft certain positions later on in the draft, and then also how many of each position you should actually be drafting. For example, if you go super running back heavy early on, say you draft like 3 running backs in the first 3 or 4 rounds, you're going with a robust RB draft strategy. You may only need to draft 1 running back throughout the entire rest of your draft because you already have 3 studs there. So maybe you draft 1 more, max you should be drafting like 2 more running backs. On the other hand, say you go 0 RB. You're not taking a running back the first 6, 7 rounds. The first running back you draft is round 8, round 9. You are going to need to eventually hammer the running back position. Even though you're punting it early on, you need to absolutely hammer it in the later rounds, and you should probably be ending up with like at least 6 running backs. So just understanding how you should be filling out the rest of your roster is definitely something that you should be aware of in your drafts. Now shifting over to mistake number 4, this is going to be drafting a second quarterback or a second tight end after you spent an early round pick on either of those positions. So when you're drafting a high upside quarterback or tight end, I am a firm believer that you do not need to draft a second option at that position. Now, there are certain situations where maybe you want to. If you're in a league where you have like an insanely deep bench, maybe you're taking like 8, 9, 10 bench slots, then that's definitely a spot, where you maybe want to snag a second option because there's going to be just 0 options available on waivers. But in your normal league where you've got 5, 6 bench slots, if you are drafting like at the quarterback position, you're drafting Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Anthony Richardson, you're never going to start like a different quarterback outside of those guys barring an injury. And if an injury happens, you just scoop someone up off of waivers. But you should not be, you're making the bet that that player is staying healthy, so you should not be playing like worst case scenario of, I need a backup if this stud quarterback goes down, because now you're just going to have someone clogging your roster barring an injury or, that one specific bye week they have. Same thing at the tight end position. If you're reaching for a Travis Kelce, a Sam Laporta, Mark Andrews, Trey McBride, Dalton Kincaid, you're betting on those guys to hit. You're betting on those guys to be elite tight end ones. So if you're drafting like a later round Pat Freiermuth or a Taysom Hill, are those guys ever going to start over them, barring an injury or a bye week? Those things do happen. You can stream the position, but it's just not worth sacrificing your depth at running back, wide receiver, if you are, already spending a premium pick on the quarterback or the tight end position. And by drafting that second player, you're almost like banking on your elite player that you spent great draft capital on to bust, or get injured. So it's just not a strategy that I'm looking for. If I'm taking one of those elite options, I'm rolling with that guy. And when the time comes, the bye week, injuries, I will find a replacement, but I'm not going to have someone just clogging my bench, never breaking into the lineup. Now, the 5th mistake is going to be not preparing for your fantasy platform. So it is going to be very, very important to familiarize yourself with the specific platform you're playing on. Sleeper, Yahoo, ESPN, whatever it is. ADP is going to be different. The draft trends are going to be different. And so familiarizing yourself includes hopping into some mock drafts, taking a look at their current ADP, also taking a look at the specific platform rankings. Like sometimes it can be sorted by the actual platform rankings, but those might differ from the actual ADP. But if you look at the platform rankings, some players might get buried. You may not see them when you're on the clock. So, looking at that is definitely something that is very important. Understanding your specific platform's ADP can really help you avoid reaching on players and also allows you to actually find some values. So, for example, on Sleeper, Deebo Samuel is being drafted as a third-round pick. I think that's fair. I'd probably take him like early third round. So I'd be willing to take him there. If I'm drafting on Sleeper, I'm fine drafting him there. But on ESPN, he's going at the 4-5 turn. So I'm not going to reach for Deebo Samuel in the third round. I can find a different player, and then I'll be able to scoop him up in the fourth, maybe even the fifth. And then, like I mentioned, the platform rankings, if you're not individually checking off each player, you may miss someone if they're like way buried in the rankings. So something to kind of keep an eye on there. And then the sixth and final mistake is going to be reaching on kickers and defenses. Personally, most of my leagues, it's no kicker, no defense. That's what I prefer. But I imagine most people watching this are probably playing in leagues with kickers, defenses, especially if it's more casual leagues, your friends, co-workers, whatever it is. But for me, I'm locked into drafting those two positions in the last 2 rounds. I will not be reaching up to draft a kicker. I will not be reaching up to draft a defense. There's just such a minimal difference between the kicker number 1 and the kicker number 20 that it's not worth sacrificing a better pick at running back, wide receiver, a depth tight end, a depth quarterback. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. There's a little bit more of a difference when we're looking at the defense number 1 compared to like the number 2 defenses, right, like 12 through 24. But you can always just stream on the waiver wire. So even if a defense isn't great to play week after week, if they're on the waiver wire and they have a great matchup the next week, you can just plug and play, get a great matchup, and that production is going to be very similar to the person who's reaching, a few rounds earlier to draft the number 1 defense, the number 2 defense, the number 3 defense. It just does not make sense to reach at those positions. You're going to see it. It's going to happen in pretty much every single draft. Someone's going to want to draft the Harrison Butker, the Justin Tucker. They're going to want to draft that number 1 defense. I can promise you guys, it is not the best draft strategy. You just wait, you pick up the value at other positions, and then you can stream kicker and defense throughout the season. But that is going to wrap it up for my 6 mistakes that you guys should be letting your idiot league members make. Hopefully you guys can avoid these in your fantasy drafts. If you enjoyed the video, do me a huge favor, hit that like button, subscribe. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.